The National Investor's motto is, you can get information anywhere, but here you get knowledge. And for well over 40 years now, Chris Temple has imparted that knowledge, an unparalleled, understandable, and useful take on the big picture of the markets and of our world. He has been out in front of what you see on the news every day on many themes. More, Chris has taken this macro knowledge and his unique analytical abilities to uncover unique investment opportunities. Often he has guided his members to big winners in resources, biotech stocks, and more. His talents and connections often getting him into ground floor opportunities before they are discovered. Without further ado, here is Chris with today's topic.
Welcome, folks. I'm Chris Temple, editor and publisher of the National Investor, here with another company spotlight today, and that being BacTech Environmental. BacTech is a really unique story, as you're going to learn. It is listed on the CSE up in Canada under the symbol BAC, and here in the OTCQB market in the US under BCCEF. It's a company I've been familiar with for quite a few years. I've known Orr, the CEO, who you're going to meet momentarily, for quite a few years. And it's a story that people have alternatively called environmental remediation, green mining, whatever. But I'm going to let him explain it to you from the horse's mouth and give you really the best and maybe even jazzier anecdotes. I'll put that on his shoulders. But in any case, BacTech, before we get going, Ross and or myself may be making some forward-looking statements. So we want to let you know about that. As you see here on the screen, you should do some serious homework on this story. It's a cool story, as you're going to learn. Secondly, on the screen here now, you see our own disclaimer from National Investor Publishing and disclosure. From time to time, we do media work and whatnot for companies that I've already recommended to our paid members, of which this video is a part. We are compensated for that, so I want to make sure that you're aware of that as well. And finally, as I mentioned, you should do your own due diligence on BacTech. Follow them on social media, go to their website, get on their mailing list. Ross has a nice little thing called Sunday Morning Coffee he puts out every week that has industry news, interesting stories from mining and environmental issues, what's going on in Ecuador, what's going on in Canada, where they're also involved and so forth. Make sure you get that. And finally, before I bring Ross on, we also at the National Investor have got an upcoming special issue, which BacTech will have a profile in as well, on story stocks, all manner of different stories that are out there, new technologies, new ways to doing things, and so forth. Some even reinvented mousetraps, and you're going to learn about those as well. So without further ado, I want to introduce to you Ross Orr, who is down here wintering with me in Florida, usually up in Ontario, where he hails from and where BacTech is located. We're visiting across the state. Right now, Ross is over in Sarasota. How are you doing today, Ross?
I'm doing great. It just took me too long to figure out that it's a great place to winter.
Well, I'll tell you what, it's a whole lot busier than up where you're from, that's for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Anyway, it's good to be back.
What's that?
I say it's good to be back chatting with you. It's been a while.
Yeah, it has been. And a lot of things have been going on. In some cases, things weren't going on for a while, and that was aggravating. But now things are heading back in the right direction again. And we're going to cover all of that. But first of all, folks, I want Ross to explain the unique and proprietary regimen that they have to do what is variably called bioleaching. Some other words and monikers have been used for it, but they essentially, as they say, and this is a easy way to put it and to remember it, they have bugs that eat rocks, and that's their motto. Our bugs eat rocks. It's a process that is very benign, that has already shown great success in showing how gold and other metals can be liberated from arsenic, from other bad or deleterious elements, at the same time making those elements benign to the environment. So this is a way in which you can do so-called green mining, recover metals, clean up messes, not do any harm to the environment. Lots of win-win-win around all of this, as you're going to learn. So Ross, as we get started, tell us the origin of BacTech's bioleaching technology and how it came to be under your care at BacTech?
Well, it goes way back. I mean, it goes back to the late 80s when, as a result of the energy crisis that happened back in the 80s, the people at King's College in London, England, were asked to see if they could use bacteria to take sulfur out of coal because they wanted a cleaner burning product to replace oil and gas and whatnot. Some Australians came along and said, forget coal, we're going to do this with gold, because a little company called Goldfields of South Africa had been messing around with bioleaching for a few years prior to that. So they picked up the guys and dragged them off to Australia, and they built a rather sizable pilot plant. And by 1994, they licensed the technology for the first time, and it was used at a mine called U&Me in Western Australia. It ran for 3 years or so, but really the gold prices in those days were, 200, 250. But it did what it was supposed to do, and that was liberate gold from arsenopyrite. And arsenopyrite, as you know, is arsenic gold sulfide. One of the nice things about bioleaching is that it produces a benign ferric arsenate, which is an EPA landfillable material. On the back of U&Me, they went to Tasmania, and they built another project under license agreement. It ran for about 15 years, so it's proved the technology, that it is scalable, which is important, obviously, because you can do a lot of stuff in the labs, but scaling it up to work commercially is usually the bugaboo for most technologies. Well, it works very well for bioleaching. That plant, as I said, ran for 15 years. It ran out of ore eventually, so it was closed down. And then they licensed the technology into China and built a plant in 2001 and doubled the capacity of that in 2008, which is sort of where I came into the picture off the board. My predecessor was intent on building a project in Nevada that the BioLeach guy said this is not a good candidate to do it, and as a result, we had a bit of a train wreck. And so I agreed to step up, from the board to take over the CEO's role, and I said I'll give you a year to do it. As it turned out, I'm still here because I fell in love with the prospects of what the technology can do. I'd be the first to admit I wish I could do it faster, but technology in mining is a very difficult thing to promote because the mistakes are costly and they're very expensive, and so you pretty well have to get somebody to do it first before the other guys would do it. So I hope that wasn't too long of it.
No, and I think Ross and you and I have talked about this as well as a number of things many a times over the years. It's not until the fairly recent times that there has been a public policy impetus that's pushing harder on this type of process. The mining companies can't ignore it anymore. Now we're certainly far away from the times that you can have, an Anaconda copper company, for example, out in Butte, Montana, that became ultimately one of the biggest Superfund sites on the planet, still there. But there's some cleanup going on there. There's cleanup going on in other Superfund sites. But, these days it's more incumbent on mining companies to check all of the ESG boxes. And we're going to get to how you've checked them with BacTech in a moment. But now all of a sudden you're a bit more fashionable, and mining companies and the industry can't ignore you anymore. So I think that's part of what has brought things to the fore. Notwithstanding that, and we're going to get to a couple looming first world applications potentially for BacTech as we end our talk in a little while. But right now, after a few forays here and there, you've settled for a variety of reasons on Ecuador generally, and on an area in Ecuador called Ponce Enrique specifically, where you saw very yawning, I think, opportunity down there to get in there and show not only how your bioleaching process works, but to really transform the local economy, a lot of local practices and so forth. So tell us what piqued your interest as a first matter, I guess, in Ecuador, Ross.
Well, again, arsenic is sort of the element that we pursue because nobody else does, which leaves a very big market there that we can go after. This particular area of Ecuador, it's about a 60-mile long belt a resource belt in southwestern Ecuador near Machala has some of the most horrific arsenic levels I've ever seen. And people don't realize that arsenic is a naturally occurring element, and it can be associated with gold. So it becomes an indicator element that prospectors will follow because they're looking for the source. In this particular case, after they I'll just go quickly what flotation is, just to make sure people understand. When you bring a ton of rock up from underground, you crush it, you grind it. But in that 1 ton of rock, only about 20% of that rock has the value, and it tends to be in the sulfides. So flotation is a process of crushing and grinding and then literally floating away the sulfides from the rest of the waste rock. So if you have 1 to 2% arsenic in the rock, in the concentrate, you're going to have 20% because everything gets rolled up. You've taken away the dilution factor. So that is basically an unsaleable product. In the old days, they burned it, smelting and roasting. Those days are over, fortunately, because you can't throw arsenic trioxide gases up the stack or deal with arsenic trioxide leftovers, much like the giant mine up in the Northwest Territories. They've been trying to deal with that for years. So we decided, as we started to look at this situation, we found that the Chinese were the only buyers of the material. And because of the arsenic levels, and because of the fact that China does have an import tax that they recently put on this type of material, their payments to the miners are 45 to 50 cents on the dollar for the gold values. They used to get 70 cents on the dollar, and they were quite happy there. Now they're not happy. So we turned this around and made it into an opportunity that's very, very positive, not only for the people in this particular area, but for the country itself. You were shipping 50% of your value overseas and getting no payment for it. So we started off and we did a 6-month bioleach test on about, material for probably 5 different mines. Got 96% recoveries for gold and effectively 100% arsenic stabilization. Went on to the next step, which was, okay, we know that we can bioleach it. We know we can get the gold liberated and the arsenic stabilized, but can you make money in it? So we hired a third party to do a bankable feasibility study. There's no underground operations in our project. So for us to go straight to a feasibility study made all the sense in the world. We're like a giant wastewater treatment plant that's being designed. We did that. The numbers were outstanding. Maybe to the point where a lot of people say to me, no, that can't be right. And I say, well, they're not our numbers. They're somebody else's numbers.
But let me inject in there since you brought that up, because this, at the time, and we all know, or most of us know, certainly participating in this, let alone investors and others watching, that it's been a pretty poor time for the last couple of years or so now to be an investor in resource stocks. But when this news came out, it did give you a lift for a while, because when people get their heads around the numbers, this is remarkable. And folks, I gave BacTech's website a little bit ago. I want to put that on the screen here again, because you need to go back to, and there was a couple preliminary ones that came out ahead of this, but especially the February 8th, 2022 press release that the company put out on this bankable feasibility study, so a couple of years ago. And the only thing that's changed that's of any significance is that the gold price is $400 higher, and the silver price even is a few dollars higher an ounce than the numbers that they use in the base case. But if you go through this, you will see the reason why this has been essentially, this project of BacTech's, not a mining project per se, has been at the very top of the list of a lot of the NGOs down there. It's been at the top of the list of the mining minister in Ecuador to get this thing permitted and get the final environmental permits in place, which happened, what, in November, right, Ross?
Well, that was the consultation. The
consultation,
actual environmental impact study was 7 months in duration. That was
right.
it. I mean, that's unheard of in mining.
Yeah, so this has checked all the boxes, and the reason is, and Ross was alluding to this when he talked about how poorly, to this point, all of the local small miners that, some mine small amounts per day, but it adds up to a fair bit. in this one region of Ecuador, how poorly they've been treated and how they're getting the short end of the stick from the only buyer they've had until now being China. And so now they've got this opportunity available where, I mean, your employees are going to make almost as much money as public officials, the best paid ones down there, by the time you get all done. And so it's really a cool story. So again, I urge you to take the time to read through this thing and the economics and the related news. It's just remarkable. And not only, Ross, are the numbers great, and we're going to get to the next steps or the last steps that are going to have to be taken before you actually start constructing this plant, which hopefully will be the first of many like it in various parts of the world. But another feather in your cap, besides the overwhelming government support, public support you've had all around the community where you're going to be operating in, is you applied to Moody's a while back for what was called a green designation to raise project financing. And as a lot of people know, it's a big deal these days to have ESG credentials for all kinds of projects like this. And there is a mechanism in a world where so many companies right now are doing what is called greenwashing and stating that they have certain credentials that make them more environmentally friendly when all it is just words. You actually applied to Moody's, and in the end, you got back more than you thought you were going to get. So tell us how that happened.
Yeah, because we engaged a group out of Quito to help us raise the capital. One of the first things they said to us was, look, you need a third party opinion that's independent on your technology and on your project. And they suggested the likes of some of the big accounting firms. And of course, when we looked into that, the prices were just staggering. I mean, and then believe it or not, it was my son Stuart actually said to me, you know, have a look at Moody's. And so we did, and the price was very reasonable. We provided all the background information on the project. They came back to us 2 or 3 months later and said, we're giving you an 80% rating, and which was like very good as opposed to excellent. And the reason we weren't excellent was we still use cyanide, like most people do in the mining industry. And even though we destroy it and, you know, it doesn't make its way into the tailings, you still use it. And so that to them was a black eye, I guess. But for a 20-point hit, I guess I can explain it away anyways, which is good. And that definitely has opened up a lot of doors for us from people that, when you mention that, all of a sudden their interest is more you know, attuned to what you're saying. And again, we've tried to do everything sort of with third parties commenting on the various aspects of what we're doing, because they're the best salesman for you. They don't have an axe to grind, or they don't have a, you know, a meal ticket at the end of the day. So
well, and beyond the green designation, I thought what was cool is that you didn't even ask for a social score.
Correct.
And yet you got that.
Yeah, I think a lot of that had to do with it's really one of my favorite aspects of the project was, and I tell this story, and I'm sorry, I'm going to tell it again, so I hope I don't bore you, but you know, the day that we walked onto the property that we eventually ended up buying, which is a 100-acre cocoa farm. I mean, these are massive cocoa trees. And I thought, oh boy, what are we going to do with these things? And originally we were surrounded by about 10 guys on motorcycles, and I thought, oh, this is the big one. I'm never going back home now. And Bernardo Brito, our country manager, went out and chatted with him and came back, and he says, no, they just wanted to know who we were. And then when I told them, they were very disappointed because they're going to be out of work. These are the people that were picking the cocoa, who worked for the farmer. And it bugged us, you know, I mean, it really did, because that wasn't why we were there, to put people out of work. We're there to put people to work. And I turned to the guys and I said, I don't know anything about cocoa farming. Do you? No? Do you? No? You know, so I said, go back to the guys and tell them to stay, pick the cocoa, and sell it for their own account. Because I said, I don't need 80 acres of dead cocoa trees. And we're only using about 20% of the property in the first phase. And I said, tell them that, you know, when we do eventually cannibalize the farm, then we'll give them a job in the plant. I mean, realistically, they'd probably be better off getting a plant in the job right, or a job in the plant right away, but I need somebody to handle these trees though at the same time. And I
Sure.
did notice, according to Bloomberg, that cocoa prices are really peaking. They're going up rapidly. So
Gone up
good for them.
nuts lately. Yeah.
Yeah, good for them.
Yeah.
So
So it's really cool. And I was glad, and I know you were surprised and thrilled to get that social designation as well. So that greases the skids for potential project financing, which is really the last major step before you can start production. Now, you've been hindered along the way. Everybody was hindered for a while by COVID. You know, this timetable might have happened sooner had it not been for that, and inability to travel and get to site and things like that for a while. And then more recently, and sadly, it's because Ecuador being a country that I've visited so many times and love so much, there's been a terrible run of narco terrorism in parts of the country and other violence that the new president has been pushing back on with Western help, primarily from the U.S. And so the bottom seems to have been put in where that's concerned a while back, and things have gotten better. In fact, you told me that in the Ponce Enriquez area, specifically in the recent past, the Army came in and kind of whoever was left there as far as these gangs kind of moved them all out of there in one big sweep.
into jail they went.
Yeah.
And, I mean, the previous mayor, to the fellow who's there now, was a thug. I mean, I've said that to many people. The new guy's great. He's a lawyer. I won't hold that against him, I guess. But you also missed out the constitutional crisis as well. I mean,
Right.
I was starting to feel like Pigpen from Charlie Brown. Every time I turned around, there was another cloud over, it was slowing down the process. During that constitutional court situation, we sat around navel gazing for 4 months. There was nothing we could do. And it wasn't just us, there was 175 companies that were all affected by this challenge that eventually became a bit of a nothing burger at the end. They just said, look, if you're not on indigenous land, keep going. Okay, that was us. And the next day we got our permit. And that was the big one. But
Yeah.
I have to say that was with 100% support from the local community. No one objected to what we're doing. They can see what's coming their way, and the fact that their income is going to go up tenfold.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, the good news too, I think, and we're not going to get into the whole politics of Ecuador. For those who have followed me, I've covered it deeply for a long time. But you mentioned the Constitutional Court. For those who are unfamiliar, I'll explain really quick that there have been on and off challenges to the ability of mining companies to operate, even where they've been granted permits. The latest one was the latest attempt to either slow down or even revoke mining permits from companies that supposedly were on land where the locals had not had a chance to voice their opinion, if they're aboriginals, if they're natives to Ecuador going way back. And is an indication, and I hope this is borne out, Ross, as the months and years go by, but as an indication of how the whole country, I think, has tired of this. And look, in Canada, there are a small handful of activists that unfortunately have the ability through the courts to gum up the works, whether they have a solid case or not. Same thing here in the US. We see it all the time. But down in Ecuador, the party that most represents those who want to try and gum up the works, stop or slow down extractive industries, their percentage of the vote collapsed in this last election. Is that, I mean, it shocked everybody. Maybe not, maybe you, it certainly shocked me. The lead candidate and his party went from, I think, 15 or 18% of the seats to 1.5% or whatever it is of the seats in the National Assembly. So Ecuador right now, thankfully, the people are wholeheartedly behind the young new president, Noboa. And they want two things. They want safety back to the country, and they've started that process. And they want a healthy economy back again, because it has not been all that healthy in the recent past. And so I think that augurs well too for cooler heads and saner and smarter heads to prevail in all this. So where are we at now, before we move on to maybe some icing on the cake down the road, in the form of what you're doing up in Sudbury, Ontario? tell us where things are at and what the efforts are where it concerns getting this project financing that's because it's
Well,
what,
I'll have a much
roughly
better
20 million that's needed for overall construction costs?
for Ecuador is 17 million.
17.
With 3 million in equity, or sorry, in working capital, because we're going to be buying concentrates from these miners on a daily basis, and there's a turnaround time of 2 to 3 weeks before you get paid for what you produce. And again, that 17 million was done in 2022, literally at the top of the supply chain problems. The stainless prices we're looking at now are literally half of what they were that went into that model. Now, you can offset that with maybe some inflation that we've all had over the last couple of years as well. So we're pretty confident in that number. There's many ways we've been looking at financing the project. We're a small company with a very small market cap. So for us to go out and raise a big chunk of equity would be very, very dilutive to the shareholders, which I'm a big one, so I'm not crazy about that. At the same time, though, it's pretty tough to get 100% debt financing for a project. We're making the case, well, look, we've already spent 4 to 5 billion US on this project to date. That is our equity contribution. Well, that some people, that doesn't fly. I've even talked to people about potentially, and nobody panic here, but maybe selling 50% of the subsidiary for the equity component. The important thing is we get one up and running. That's at the end of the day, you get one up, you're going to have 6 up. I mean, it's as simple as that, because we know we're already contractually obligated to expand this small 50-ton-a-day plant up to 200 to 250 tons a day, which happens to be the production from this gold belt in Ecuador. But if in fact we could import stuff from other countries if we really had to. What's great on the environmental side from this is that some of the miners in Ponce Enriquez are not technically on site from an environmental perspective. We won't deal with them unless they are. So it's going to drive all these companies to get the proper credentials and to operate in a fashion that you're supposed to operate in. Every day I'm getting emails from Peru and Colombia. This arsenic is a big problem. And that's what we do. And as I said, for right now, we literally own this market for processing high arsenic gold concentrates. And we've got to get that first one up and running. And again, so going back to the debt side, one of the big issues, and I was explaining this to it yesterday in my Sunday morning coffee, is that debt is a marriage for 5 to 10 years. And so the people that are going to be giving you money better be happy and have done their homework, that they can actually live and see getting their money back at the end of the day. Yeah, with equity, you can sell it tomorrow if you want. You can sell it today if you want in the marketplace and leave. So it's, people have been reaching out to me and somewhat frustrated, I might add, saying, where's the debt? Where's the debt? And I'm saying, look, you can't think that we're sitting here doing nothing. I mean, that's crazy. Why would we do everything that we've done to date to get to where we are and then stop? It's crazy. So take comfort in the fact that we are talking to as many people as we can. And I would say the short list is less than 10 now, but everybody's at different stages of looking at our data room. And all I can say is I hope it's, we get an answer to this soon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's all you can say. You don't have control of their checkbooks, anybody that you're talking to, but you do have control of a great story, and hopefully sooner rather than later, the enough boxes are checked for one or more parties, and you're off to the races. Because I agree, and you and I were talking about another company that we mutually know before we came on here, whose share price has been a rocket recently, and it's because after a long time they have their first bona fide deal for a plant with their water remediation technology, and all of a sudden says, holy cow, this is real. This isn't the lab. This isn't pie in the sky. This isn't we hope we can do this. Now they've got their first deal, and you're right on the edge of that. Well, you've got the deal. You just need to get the construction. And I'm firmly convinced that down the road you'll see this replicated everywhere, and I want to end with that for present purposes, Ross, because you've had some research going on up in Sudbury, Ontario. You alluded in your opening remarks that this technology sure as heck didn't start in Ecuador. This has been known about all over the world. And now is a technology and process that is coming into its own, belatedly, but it is. So you've got some top people that are working on material up in Canada, which probably has leftover waste and stuff that couldn't be mined from years back that dwarfs what you're looking at in Ecuador. Tell us a little bit about that project.
Well, it's an interesting one because we've sort of dusted off some work that we did 20 odd years ago in Australia. There's a sulfide mineral called pyrrhotite, Pyrrhotite, and it's a very, very bizarre sulfide because if you leave it out on the ground, it'll break into flames. I mean, it'll start to combust because it's trying to oxidize itself so quickly. So back in, I think it was around 1999, 2000, there's a place called Radio Hill. It's a mine in Australia. And we did a big pilot plant on pyrrhotite tailings, trying to recover the nickel and cobalt that was in the material. What we ended up doing was making a big mess because we separated everything into various, individual elements, but then we couldn't get it out of solution. It was a technological success and an economic flop. So you fast forward, and of course, everybody's been working on different ways of getting things out of solution, whether it's filtration, precipitation, etc. And we now think that if we break down pyrrhotite into its basic elements, which are nickel and cobalt, iron, about 60% of pyrrhotite is iron, and sulfur, that you basically might be able to sell the parts individually. And one of the things we're looking at doing is, of course, is can we use that iron and pelletize it into an iron ore product that could be sold into the steel business? West of Sudbury, like literally 100 miles is Sault Ste. Marie, where Algoma hangs their hat, and they make carbon pipe, for the oil and gas business and whatever else. With the sulfur, you can sell it to the sulfuric acid industry. Obviously, the cobalt and the nickel you can precipitate out, and that's going to go into the battery side of things. And interestingly enough, the easy part is the bioleaching, because I think I said earlier, it's trying to oxidize so hard on its own. So over 100 years, they have probably, I think the estimates are anywhere between 80 and 100 million tons of this stuff that they separated away from the good sulfide, which is pentlandite, and they threw it into the lakes. Because if you put it underwater, it's not going to oxidize. Well, things you learn over the years, there's actually bacteria in the water that actually have been nibbling away at this stuff, and it creates an acid that eventually, will kill the lake. I mean, if filling it up hasn't killed it already. And that water leaves and it goes on to the next lake, and now you're sending acid everywhere. So Vale, I think partly in response to the disaster they had in Brazil, is a lot more cognizant of their tailings situation. They own probably 75% of that liability, and Glencore would own 25%. So we're part of a consortium with University of Toronto, NRCan, which is the Feds, Laurentian University, and of course, leading our charge is a woman named Dr. Nadia Mikochik, who is arguably Canada's best known bioeducator or professor, whatever you.
Right.
She sort of, when she talks, people listen, and she's an incredible work ethic. This woman, she just goes 100 miles an hour, and really has done a great job of drawing attention to what bioleaching is all about. So she's running the program, and I would think by mid-year we're going to have a pretty good idea as to whether or not we can actually make these individual products. We've got a couple of patents we want to file still, provisionary patents, before we can say more. But I think for the most part, it's going very well.
So the near term, I guess, milepost that we're looking at most of all, Ross, is hopefully there's some success with one or more of the parties you're talking to. And once you do have the financing in hand, you're not talking about a terribly long runway before you're actually in production, are you, as far as the whole construction process
see it
goes.
like a year at the outside.
Yeah, it's not going to be too terribly long. So you said you're not actually mining, you're constructing plants, bringing in the tanks and all that kind of thing. So
Yeah, the tanks are done on site.
oh,
They're
okay,
fabricated on site. So you bring in these huge sheets of stainless. You have them sort of bent in Machala, which is only 30 miles away, and up to site they go. But it's a big welding operation.
cool.
And I think obviously security is going to be an issue as well too.
Right.
We probably pick up some big fences around
Yeah, for sure.
company.
So anyway, it's something that I've followed folks along with Ross for a lot of years. We're getting finally to pay dirt. Keeps it, you know, as Ross said earlier, your pig pen analogy. It's been one delay and one gee, what else is going to happen after the next? But ratcheting.
Nothing.
Yeah, but ratcheting forward happily as time has gone on. So anyway, folks, again, this is a really cool, disruptive story. A lot of people can get their heads around cleaning up the environment at the same time that you're able to recover gold and other metals. So do your homework, check out BacTech, go to the website, follow them on social media, follow yours truly. Because I have updates on a fairly regular basis when news comes out. And again, last but not least, if you're already on my if you're not already, I should say, on my mailing list, make sure you get on it because you'll be seeing a written report on story stocks coming up for just the next few weeks, and BacTech, of course, being one of those. So, Ross, hopefully we'll get to cross paths before too terribly much longer while it's down in my part of the country.
Yeah, I wanted to think, you know what, call me. I mean, don't be afraid to pick up the phone and call me if you have a question. I do it all day, or email me. I'm happy to respond. And I think of myself as sort of an educator as well as running a company. It takes a while. You know, that whole our Bugs Eat Rocks thing, that's all it says in our booth. So at PDAC next week, people are going to walk by, they're going to stop, they're going to look, and they're going to go, and they're going to look again, and they're going to say, okay, what does that mean? So
and
we don't
folks,
have drill holes and everything. It's just our Bugs Eat Rocks. That's all it says. So.
Yeah, and I can attest to that, folks, because on a number of occasions, I've had people who are subscribers of mine or investors that want to get more information. They want to go right to the horse's mouth. And this particular horse is happy to educate you, as he says, and answer questions and so forth. It's been a slow, but I think in the end, sure process to get to where you are now. All of the political turmoil you've had to put up with in Ecuador, now that's starting to be more and more in the rearview mirror. You get some financing in hand, and it's off to the races. And again, I firmly believe, and I know you do, that once you have the first plant running, people see the benefits to the community, the money that's being made, the higher wages, the better lives. This is going to spread. There's no question that this will be the first of many, in my mind anyway. So Ross, thanks much for your time today, and we'll talk soon.
Great, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
For much more of the National Investor's cutting-edge content and actionable investment opportunities, make sure to subscribe to Chris's free content at nationalinvestor.com. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe to this channel too. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.